Hi, my name is Marty Plecki. Today we're going to learn the two key things about how to successfully make sourdough bread. There's a ton of information out there on this topic, and so much of it is so specific and so detailed that many people, I believe, end up not trying it because it's so complicated. For me, sourdough bread is so much more healthy than yeast risen bread that I wanted to make it successfully myself. The two key things are, as long as your starter is not dead, it's okay to use. And you don't have to be too picky about how much you have or how little you have. Once you put the starter, as long as it's not dead, once you put the starter in the dough, it's like feeding it so much that it will take off on its own. The second key item is, if it jiggles, it will make a successful loaf of sourdough bread. This is the starter from the last time I made sourdough bread. I had about this much left in the bottom of this glass, and that's about 20 or 30 grams. I fed it right after I started making the dough for the last loaf, and it came up to this rubber band. So I added about 50 grams of water and 50 grams of unbleached all-purpose flour. Then I put it in the refrigerator. So today I wanted to make another loaf of bread, sourdough bread, and I took it out of the refrigerator. It had risen about this much while it was in the refrigerator, and I just put it out on the counter, and it rose all the way to here, so it was very active. Since then, it's dropped back down to here, and there are folks that talk about sourdough bread that would indicate you need to feed it again and let it rise again so that it's more active. I'm not going to do that. Sourdough is not as mysterious as some of the videos might make you believe. So what I'm going to do with this is put it in the dough that I mix, and that will be like feeding it because there's so much flour in a new batch of dough. So then I'll put it in a warm place to make it rise faster, about 85 degrees Fahrenheit, and let it rise in the first bulk fermentation process for about 4 to 6 hours. I'm just going to take all of it out except about 20 grams. So I'm good. I'm just going to set this aside for now and pour some warm water into, well, all of it. Pour all of the warm water. And the warm water is about 110 degrees. Maybe between 100 and 110 degrees Fahrenheit. And mix all this up. So here goes 2 cups of bread flour in here. And 2 teaspoons of salt. I'd probably put in maybe 2.5 teaspoons because I like the bread saltier. And I should have put the salt in before I put the flour in so that it would have been mixed a little bit better right from the start. This is the dough mixed up. It looks shaggy. That's the descriptor that most of the folks that make this that have a lot more experience than I do call it. A shaggy dough. I'm going to let this rest for about 15 minutes and then do some stretch and fold. to strengthen the gluten in the dough. While the dough is resting, I'm going to take this leftover starter, put it on the scale. Now I'm going to put in 50 grams of unbleached all-purpose flour. And now I'll put 48 grams of water. Now I'm mixing up the starter for the next batch. The water that I mixed in here, I had taken from the tap and left out for about an hour. Let the chlorine and the city water diffuse just to give the yeast a little bit of a better chance to survive. So here's the starter, and I'm going to move the rubber band up to the top of the starter. That'll give me a good indication later on when it starts to double. And as soon as it starts to get active, I'm going to put this in the refrigerator to slow down the activation of the yeast. Here's my first stretch and fold. I get my fingers a little bit wet. It helps the dough not to stick to the fingers so bad. So I just dig the dough out from the sides, stretch it, and you can see that it's starting to really get stiff, or stringy, I suppose. And that's the development of the gluten, which is a huge component of making this bread texture right and tasty. Just going to turn this guy over and let it rest another 15 minutes for the next stretch and fold. This is the second stretch and fold. This is the last stretch and fold. I'm going to get both hands a little bit wet. The dough is looking pretty good even right now. Let it rest for about 4 to 6 hours. The dough is looking pretty good after 3 hours at about 85. It's not quite doubled, and with the time that I have, it won't be ready for dinner if I don't do something else to accelerate the doubling. Another way to look at whether it's ready or not is the jiggle test, I call it. So I'm going to jiggle this thing. You see that there's a little bit of a jiggle to this dough, but it's not quite jiggly enough. So the temperature on this oven is coming up to about I'm going to shut it off at 120 so I don't melt the plastic or kill the yeast. And in it goes. I just took the dough out of the oven and look at that guy. It's beautiful. Watch this jiggle. If you don't have that, you can't go to the next step. So I've lightly floured the surface, and I've also lightly floured my homemade or makeshift proofing baskets. I didn't want to buy a proofing basket until I know that I'm going to keep up with this sourdough stuff. And I wanted to make 2 loaves because eating one whole loaf with just 2 people, it's just too much, and it goes real hard if you leave it for a few days. So I'm going to cut this, I'm going to turn this out onto the lightly floured surface. But now I'm going to cut this dough about in half. All right, now what you're supposed to do is take this and fold it into the middle. So here's one. I'm going to turn this guy over onto a floured surface and work on this one for a little bit. All right, now I'm going to shape these, continuously pushing it under. And it's still very nice and shaky. Now, since I want a long loaf, I'm going to stretch these guys out. Stretch this thing out. Fold it like this. Fold this guy over like that. Now we set the seam side up in the proofing basket and make sure that the seam is kind of pinched together so it doesn't unfold while it's rising for the second time. So the seam side up, because after the second rising, you flip the dough onto parchment paper just before putting it into the oven to bake. Here's our loaves. Now what I'm going to do with this is put it back into the oven where it's nice and warm, and that is to accelerate the increase in size. Maybe double, I don't know. We'll have to see. These could possibly have risen further, but they have gotten bigger, so they should be pretty airy. They're still a little shaky, which is a good thing. I'm going to turn them out onto this parchment paper. I have the cookie sheet that I'm going to put them on in the oven preheating. And what I'm going to do is take the cookie sheet out, put these on the cookie sheet, then put this over. I'll sprinkle water down here around it because the water is supposed to keep the crust soft until the gas and yeast inside the loaf has a chance to make it all rise. Without that, the bread crusts over so fast at 450 degrees Fahrenheit that it suppresses the oven spring that the bread is supposed to get. So right now I'm going to score both of these loaves. This is a very sharp knife. I've seen many people use razor blades instead of a knife because the razors are typically sharper. Well, I forgot to put the camera on when I took the baking sheet out and put it on these oven mitts. I transferred the spritzed loaves onto the sheet, and then I poured a little bit of very hot water onto the sheet and onto the parchment paper. Then I covered it over with the top and bottom of that thing I call the Dutch oven and put it into the oven. I just took off the bottom and the top of this homemade Dutch oven. Here's what the bread looked like. They look really good to me. Now I'm going to bake them for about another 15 minutes. Well, there they are. I have to let them cool for about an hour before cutting into them. That will be perfect timing for dinner. So these have cooled off for about an hour. And the way the loaves normally crunch like this in videos that I've seen of folks way better at this than I am show about the same thing, that it's kind of springy even after baking. I'm going to cut into this and see how it turns out. Well, there you go, folks. I say it may not be perfect, but it's dang close. One thing I'd like to share is, if a bumbler like me can get this right, so can you. I've shown other people how to make sourdough bread. Here's a quick clip. So this loaf was made by my two grandsons, Cole and Carter. So Carter, yep. Open up this oven, take this mitt, and take the top off. Take it, there you go. So there's the loaf, and it's looking really nice. We're gonna let that crisp up for about 10 minutes. So my two grandsons, Carter and Coley, helped make this, but actually they did it all. I just supervised. What do you think, guys?
I thought it rose really well in the pan.
I hope it tastes great.
There you go, folks. If you get something from this video, click the like icon, and it would be great if you subscribed. Subscribing doesn't cost anything, and you can unsubscribe just as easily as subscribing. Also, leave a comment. I don't get too many comments, so I can say that I enjoy them. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.